Did the farm lose one of its workers, or are you actually here to compete? The late April wind in Delta County carried the cold of melting snow from the far-off mountains, mingled with the green scent of apple buds just breaking open. This dry, stubborn land had grown used to long winters and scorching summers, where people wrestled not only with weather but also with the limits of their own endurance. Jake Miller, 16 years old, the only son of a farm machinery repairman and part-time apple grower, stepped off the rattling yellow school bus in front of the gates of the U.S. National Mathematics Training Camp. He carried a faded backpack borrowed from his cousin. Inside were a few thick notebooks with their corners curled from months of use, each page dense with fine pencil strokes, numbers, symbols, and sketches of ideas that seemed too large for the page. The campus stretched wide before him, its white buildings gleaming under the spring sun. Rows of young maples reached upward, their new leaves trembling. Around him, other students moved in clusters, pressed jackets, clean shoes, gleaming new laptops balanced easily in their hands. The smooth roll of suitcase wheels hummed along the paved walkways. In the middle of this scene, Jake's rubber work boots looked like something misplaced from another world. The heels were cracked, the edges dusted with dry mud from the last time he had stood in the orchard fixing the water pump. A voice rose nearby, tinged with mockery. A blond boy in a gray hoodie with a private school crest gave Jake a quick glance, his eyes settling on the boots. Did the farm lose one of its workers, or are you actually here to compete? Jake did not answer. His gaze slid past the boy the way one might look at a gear slightly out of alignment. Notice, understand, and move on. He had met such eyes before. Ever since he began solving problems, no one in his hometown believed a farm boy could understand. 3 weeks earlier, the sky had been heavy with low clouds. Jake was lying on his back beneath the belly of a John Deere harvester, hands black with oil. The old machine coughed unevenly as his father, Thomas Miller, called from the edge of the field. "Jake, letter for you, from Washington, D.C." He said it with a puzzled note, as if unsure how an envelope from the nation's capital could possibly find its way here, to a small wooden house tucked between an apple orchard and a yard littered with rusted machinery. Jake wiped his hands on his shirt and took the envelope. The paper inside was thick, the ink still smelling faintly fresh. The first line, printed in bold, stopped him where he stood. "We are pleased to invite you to the U.S. National Mathematics Training Camp." At the bottom of the page, the logo of the Mathematical Association of America gleamed in blue ink. To most, it was just an emblem. To Jake, it was the sign of a doorway into another world, a world of unsolved problems, of theorems that breathed like living things. News of the letter swept through the small town faster than the spring wind. At the repair shop on Main Street, old Mr. Harris shook his head. "That camp is for city kids with tutors. Must be a mistake." At the grocery store, the owner, who had once let Jake buy bread on credit, leaned toward Jake's mother. "He is good at math, yes, but those programs, they are not meant for Delta County kids." Jake heard the words without reacting. He knew there was no malice in them, only habit. The habit of believing that all the important doors in life closed before kids like him ever reached them. In Delta County, being good at math meant knowing how to calculate the price of fertilizer or the yield from a row of trees, not proving the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality or working out a formula for an unusual kind of integer partition. The Millers had little to spare. Jake's only pair of sneakers had worn through at the soles. He decided to bring his work boots, the same pair he wore in the orchard, solid and warm, though they fit none of the images of a national math competitor. His mother pressed a $20 bill into his palm, the last cash left in the house that week. "It is not much, but you go. People may doubt you, but do not ever doubt yourself." Her voice was slow and steady, as if each word had been carved into wood. That morning, the school bus rattled along the red dirt road. Jake sat by the window, watching the fields slide away behind him. He thought about the letter, about the nights spent under the weak yellow light in the kitchen, working through old collections of international mathematical Olympiad problems. Some had taken him weeks to solve, with nothing but paper, a pencil, and a small chalkboard. He remembered the day he first encountered Pick's theorem, the one about the area of a polygon drawn on a lattice of integer points. It was winter then, snow covering the orchard outside. In his mind, each little square between the points became a plot of farmland, and the formula area equals I plus B2, 1, was not just an equation, but a reminder that order can be coaxed from what first seems scattered. The campus felt like another country entirely. The buildings stood tall and white, hallways broad, the lawns trimmed to perfection. Jake walked past a group of students trading stories about past competitions, tossing around names like the International Mathematical Olympiad and the Putnam competition. He listened in silence, storing away their talk of solution strategies, how a complex geometry problem could be dismantled into smaller triangles, or how a combinatorics problem might be transformed into counting paths on a graph. It was like hearing a song whose melody he already knew, though he had never heard it played by a full orchestra. His assigned room was number 214 in the dormitory wing. On the other bed sat a sleek black suitcase, its contents neatly folded beside a brand-new laptop. The owner had not arrived yet. Jake set his backpack on his bed, opened it, and pulled out his thickest notebook. The first page was crowded with formulas and diagrams, volume calculations for polyhedra, notes on Fibonacci sequences used in modeling apple tree growth. A while later, he heard footsteps in the hall. A tall boy stepped in, glanced at Jake, then down at his boots. A faint smirk crossed his face, but he said nothing. That afternoon, everyone gathered in the large hall for orientation. On stage stood a slender woman with brown hair, introducing herself as Rebecca, the head coach. Her voice was warm and clear, each word carrying the weight of something that had been tested by time. She spoke about the journey ahead, the challenges of the weeks to come, and the fact that this camp was the first gateway to representing the country in mathematics at the highest level. Her eyes moved across the room, and for a moment they rested on Jake, who sat upright, his dark brown eyes bright in the stage light. When the session ended, Jake walked out alone. He knew that from this moment on, every test and every training session would be a measure not just of intellect, but of resolve. He thought of his mother's words and his father bent over the harvester. In Delta County, a single frost could ruin an entire season's harvest. Jake understood that the problems here would be just as unforgiving. One wrong step, one flawed assumption, and the whole structure would collapse. But he also knew that if he could stand firm against the weight of doubt, the door ahead would open. And so, beneath the young maples, the worn boots kept moving over the stone path, carrying with them the smell of machine oil, damp earth, and a mind filled with numbers. Jake could not yet know that here, the hardest problems would not be on paper, but in proving to the world that a boy from Delta County was worth more than anyone expected. The first morning of camp dawned with a pale sky, the kind that promised warmth by noon, but still carried a chill that made breath visible. Jake woke before the alarm. Years of helping his father in the orchard had trained him to greet the day before the sun fully claimed it. He sat on the edge of his narrow dorm bed, the mattress a little too soft for his liking, and listened to the quiet rustle of a campus not yet awake. His roommate, the tall boy from yesterday, was still asleep, one arm flung over his face. The suitcase stood at the foot of his bed, half open, revealing a neat row of shirts in school colors and a set of notebooks bound in leather. Jake laced up his work boots, the same steady motion he had made thousands of times in the barn, and stepped into the hall. The dormitory smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint. Outside, the grass sparkled with dew, and sprinklers ticked methodically along the far lawn. Jake walked slowly, taking in the maples, the trimmed hedges, the symmetry of the buildings. It was a kind of order that reminded him of a proof. Every element in its place, each line leading somewhere inevitable. The dining hall was already half full. Long tables lined the space, sunlight pouring through tall windows. Groups of students sat together, talking over plates of eggs and toast. Jake joined the breakfast line quietly. As he slid his tray onto an empty spot, a boy across the table glanced at his boots and smirked. "Oh, so there is a diversity program here." The comment hung in the air, half mocking, half curious. A few others laughed softly. Jake simply unfolded his napkin and began to eat. He had learned long ago that answering such remarks gave them weight. One student, a girl with short, dark hair and sharp eyes, watched the exchange without smiling. When the others turned back to their food, she leaned forward slightly. "I am Sarah," she said. "You are from Colorado, right?" Jake nodded. "Delta County. That is apple country, isn't it?" "Most years," he said, depending on the frost. She smiled faintly, as if satisfied that he could speak plainly. After breakfast, the students were herded toward the main lecture hall for the diagnostic test. The camp's head coach, Rebecca, stood at the front, a stack of papers in her arms. "This is not graded in the traditional sense," she said, her voice even. "It is meant to see how you think, not just what you know. But be aware. You may surprise yourself." Jake found his seat near the back. The test began with a mixture of algebra, geometry, and combinatorics. He moved steadily, skipping none of the questions, but not rushing either. The problems grew harder, winding toward the sort of puzzles that resisted quick answers. One question in particular caught his eye. A number theory problem involving partitions of integers into distinct primes. Most students around him scribbled a few lines, then circled the page, unsure where to go. Jake leaned back in his chair. The orchard came to him, not the rows of trees, but the way his father counted harvest bins, grouping them by crate sizes to load the truck evenly. He saw the problem as an orchard divided into plots of varying yields and began building a solution from that image. His pencil moved quickly now, the steps unfolding as naturally as a wheel turning on its axle. When time was called, he set his pencil down and looked up. Rebecca gathered the tests. As she glanced through them, her gaze caught on one paper. She studied the neat handwriting, the complete proofs, the small margin notes. Her expression was unreadable, but she made a quiet mark in the corner of the page. The afternoon brought the first problem-solving workshop. The students were split into groups, each at a round table with a whiteboard. Sarah ended up in Jake's group, along with two boys who had already announced their SAT math scores in casual conversation. The instructor for their table, a graduate student from MIT, gave them a geometry problem. Given a convex polygon with integer coordinates, prove that its area is an integer or a half integer. One boy launched into a guess about symmetry. The other began sketching triangles without direction. Jake, listening, thought again of winter in the orchard, the snow-covered ground marked by fence posts at perfect intervals. "That is Pick's theorem," he said quietly. "Area equals I plus B over 2 minus 1. I is the number of interior lattice points, B the boundary points." The boys looked at him blankly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Can you show us?" Jake stood, chalk in hand. He drew the polygon, marked the points, and began counting in a way that made the theorem seem like common sense. The graduate student watched with a small smile. By the end, the group had not only the proof, but also a sense of why it must be true. Sarah gave Jake a nod as they packed up. Later, walking back to the dorm, Sarah fell into step beside him. "You have done this without formal training, haven't you?" "Mostly," Jake admitted. "Old books. Internet when I could get it. My dad's friend used to teach high school math before he retired. He gave me some old competition problems. And you just kept going." Jake shrugged. "I like seeing how things fit. Math is cleaner than life." That evening, Rebecca called Jake aside as the other students drifted toward dinner. "I saw your diagnostic," she said. "That integer partition problem. I have seen PhD students take hours to find a construction like yours." Jake looked down at his boots. "I just thought of it like dividing the orchard into plots." Rebecca smiled, but there was something measured in her tone. "Keep thinking like that. You will need it here." Back in the dining hall, the tables buzzed with energy. Some groups compared answers from the morning, others talked about past achievements. Across the room, the blonde boy from the first day, Travis, was holding court, telling a story about winning a national prep school competition. His eyes slid toward Jake, then away again, as if measuring a rival he did not want to acknowledge. Sarah leaned across the table toward Jake. "That one is dangerous," she said under her breath. "He likes to win, and he likes everyone to know it." Jake simply kept eating, the hum of voices washing over him. Night came softly to the campus. The lamps along the paths glowed against the darkening sky. In the dorm room, Jake sat at his desk, a fresh sheet of paper before him. He began sketching out a problem he had seen once but never solved, a combinatorics question about counting paths on a grid with certain forbidden steps. The rhythm of the pencil on paper steadied him. In the orchard, problems came in the form of broken parts or weather patterns. Here they came as lines and numbers. Yet the work felt the same, patient, precise, and necessary. He thought about what the next days would bring. The camp was not only about skill. It was about proving you belonged. Jake knew that in the eyes of some here, his boots, his accent, and his small-town origin would always mark him as an outsider. But math did not care where you came from. It cared only for the truth of your reasoning, the strength of your proof. And in that space, Jake felt at home. The third day of camp began with a restless energy. The morning session had ended early, and rumors drifted through the dorm halls like wind through an open barn door. Something about sponsors visiting. Something about cuts to the training team before the camp even reached its midpoint. Jake noticed the change in mood during lunch. Students who had been relaxed now sat a little straighter, their conversations careful. Even Travis, usually loud, kept his voice low as he spoke to a man in a tailored suit near the windows. The man's silver tie pin caught the light whenever he moved his head. When the announcement came, it was brief. Rebecca stepped to the front of the dining hall. "We have a visitor today," she said evenly. "Mr. Halverson, Director of Marketing for Vale Corp., one of our main sponsors, will be observing our sessions this afternoon." Jake did not know Vale Corp., but the way other students reacted, a slight stiffening, a quick glance at their clothes, told him this was not a man used to being ignored. That afternoon, the advanced problem-solving workshop felt more like a performance. Halverson moved from table to table, smiling at students, asking them about their schools and plans. When he reached Jake's group, the air around them tightened. "And you are," he said, turning toward Jake Miller, from Delta County, Colorado. Halverson's gaze dropped to the boots. His smile thinned. "And how did you come to be here?" "I qualified through the regional and national selection tests," Jake replied simply. Halverson's head tilted slightly. as though Jake had answered in an unexpected way. He turned to Rebecca, who was nearby. "You know," he said in a voice just loud enough for the group to hear, "we have a brand image to maintain. The students who represent the country should reflect the right standard." Rebecca's jaw tightened. Jake said nothing, though the words sat in his chest like cold iron. The rest of the workshop passed in a blur. Jake solved the assigned problem, a functional equation requiring a substitution trick, but his mind kept circling back to Halverson's comment. In the orchard, appearance meant little. A good tool was valued for its function, not its shine. But here, it seemed some people measured worth by polish before proof. That evening, Sarah found him sitting outside the dorm, notebook open on his lap. "I heard what Halverson said," she began. "You should know, Vale Corp funds almost half this camp." "If they want someone out, they have leverage." Jake looked up at the dusky sky. The first stars were visible over the campus rooftops. "So if they decide I do not fit, that's it." Sarah hesitated. "Not if Rebecca fights for you. But it could get ugly." The next morning, the tension was thicker. Travis walked into the breakfast hall with a certain brightness in his step, as if carrying good news no one else knew. He sat at Jake's table uninvited. "You know," he said casually, "there are always alternates. If a spot opens up, they can bring in someone else, maybe someone who looks more like a champion on the world stage." Jake's spoon paused above his oatmeal. He met Travis's gaze, but his voice stayed level. "Champions are made on the problems, not the stage." Travis only smiled. "We will see." Midday brought a team challenge. 6 problems in 2 hours, points awarded for both correct solutions and elegant methods. Halverson and 2 other Vale Corp representatives sat in the back, murmuring occasionally to each other. Jake's team was given a combinatorics problem involving tiling a 2x(n) rectangle with dominoes and L-shaped trominos. The others started writing recurrence relations, but the expressions grew unwieldy. Jake studied the shapes. He saw the problem not as symbols, but as stacking crates of different sizes in the barn, each layer affecting the next. Within minutes, he found the recurrence T of n equals T of n minus 1 plus T of n minus 2 plus 2 times T of n minus 3. With base cases drawn from the simplest configurations, the team used his formula to compute the answer quickly. When Rebecca announced the results, Jake's team had scored highest on elegance for that round. She allowed herself the smallest glance toward Halverson, who did not smile. That night, a meeting was called for the camp's coaching staff. The students were told to stay in their dorms, but sound carries in old buildings. From the hallway outside the lounge, Jake heard Halverson's voice, low but sharp. "We cannot have him representing the country. This is not just about mathematics. It is about presentation. Our brand partners expect a certain image, and frankly, a boy in muddy boots from a farm does not fit." Rebecca's answer came clear, though controlled. "If you want the best mathematicians, you take the best, no matter their boots. If you want a fashion show, you are in the wrong camp." There was a pause, then Halverson's voice again. "Without Vale Corp's funding, you would not have a team at all." Jake stepped back from the door. The orchard had taught him patience, but also that storms could strip fruit from the trees in a single night. This storm was gathering fast. Back in his room, Jake opened a blank page. He wrote down a problem he had been thinking about for weeks, one about counting lattice paths that avoid a diagonal barrier. The solution was not obvious, but working on it steadied him. In the orchard, a broken tractor could be fixed by working through each gear, each connection. Here, he would fix the problem of being underestimated by letting his solutions speak louder than his background. Tomorrow would bring another test, another chance to prove that in mathematics, the only image that mattered was the one drawn by a clean, Unbroken proof. The morning light came sharp and clear through the narrow dorm window, the kind of light that makes edges look cleaner and shadows more defined. Yet to Jake it felt muted, as if a thin veil hung between him and the day. He woke not to the chirp of birds or the hum of sprinklers, but to the muffled thud of quick footsteps in the hall and the sudden drop in conversation whenever a door opened. His roommate's bed was already made. Hospital tight corners, the way boarding school students seemed to do without thinking. The scent of cologne lingered faintly in the room. Jake washed his face in the cold tap water, laced his boots, and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of toast from the dining hall below, but the hall itself felt watchful. As he walked down the stairs, he noticed a few glances, not hostile exactly, but not neutral either. That subtle flicker in the eyes of people who know something you do not or think they do. Breakfast was a busy murmur of trays and silverware. Jake took a seat at the edge of a long table halfway through pouring milk over his oatmeal when Sarah arrived. She sat opposite him, leaning in slightly as if she were about to share an equation too delicate for public hearing. "I heard your spot has already been promised to someone else," she said. Jake looked at her, not startled, not even annoyed, just taking in the fact of it. "Who told you that?" "It is moving through the dorms," she replied. "Travis says Vale Corp wants a different candidate. Someone who looks the part for the press photos. Someone who does not wear." She glanced at his boots, not in judgment, but in solidarity. Those Jake stirred the oatmeal slowly, each turn of the spoon measured. "Rumors travel faster than frost in a spring orchard," he said quietly. "And they can kill the season before it even starts." Sarah's expression tightened. "This is not just talk. Jake Valecorp has done this before. Not here, but in other programs they sponsor. They are obsessed with the public image. You are going to have to be ready." By mid-morning, the whispers had reached the lecture hall. Jake could feel them without hearing them in full conversations that thinned and broke off when he approached the way people draw back from a chessboard when they do not want you to see their position. That day's lecture was on advanced number theory. The instructor, a wiry man with quick movements and eyes that darted like they were reading an invisible page, wrote across the board, "Find the smallest primitive root, modulo p where p is prime." He explained briefly the idea of a primitive root, a number whose powers generate all non-zero residues. Modulo p. Jake was already writing before the chalk hit the board a second time. To him, residues were like stacks of apple crates of different heights. The goal was to find the stack that, when copied enough times, gave you every possible height before repeating. He tested small candidates, calculating their orders. Each failed case like trying a key that did not turn the lock. When one number produced all residues, he knew he had the right primitive root. The instructor asked for volunteers. Jake raised his hand. His explanation was concise, starting from the group of units modulo p, reminding them that its order is p-1, and showing why a primitive root must have exactly that order. His steps were clear enough for even the quieter students to follow without rereading their notes twice. The instructor nodded. "Very clear. Thank you, Jake." For a few moments, the whispering stopped. Pens scratched. Proofs were checked. For that short stretch of time, truth, neat, logical truth, had a louder voice than rumor. At the afternoon break, Sarah found him in the courtyard under the maple trees. Jake had his notebook open, the page divided into grids of small boxes. "You know, Travis is behind this, right?" she said. Jake did not look up. "He talks. People listen. But words are not proofs. That is the problem," Sarah said. "Some people here care more about the story than the solution." Jake finished shading in a section of the grid before closing the notebook. Then I will just have to make the solution so strong they cannot tell the story without it. The camp's schedule that afternoon was the team relay challenge. 6 linked problems in 2 hours. Each team member solved one, passing their result to the next, whose problem depended on it. A single mistake in an early stage could ruin the chain Jake's team opened with Sarah, who took the first problem, a geometry proof using Siva's theorem to prove concurrency in a triangle. Her answer was crisp. Her diagram neat enough to belong in a textbook. She passed the numeric result to Jake for the second link. His problem involved transforming the triangle into a set of coordinates and calculating the area of a related polygon on the integer lattice. Jake recognized it as a direct application of Pick's theorem, the kind of connection his orchard-trained eye spotted quickly. He counted the interior and boundary points, applied the formula area equals I plus B over 2 minus 1, and passed the answer along without hesitation. The third teammate, now confident in the input, finished his part quickly. When the final time was called, their team had completed all 6 problems with no corrections needed. Rebecca read the results aloud. First place, Team 5. Sarah grinned at Jake. Across the room, Travis did not clap. Evening settled over the campus in long, golden stripes of light across the grass. Jake walked alone around the pond near the science building. The water's surface reflected the first points of starlight. The orchard felt far away now, but its lessons came with him in every step. In the orchard, storms were inevitable. You could not stop the wind or the frost. You could only prepare, strengthen the branches, trust the roots. Rumors were storms too sudden, damaging, and sometimes lingering long after the sky cleared. But an orchard that had been pruned and tended could survive a bad season. When Jake returned to his dorm room, the desk light was on. A folded piece of paper lay in the center, its edges too sharp to have been left by accident. He unfolded it. Enjoy your place while it lasts. No signature. The handwriting was rigid, deliberate. Jake read it once, then set it beside his notebook. The next page was blank. He picked up his pencil and began drawing a graph. Small circles for vertices, lines for edges marking possible paths. The problem he set for himself was to count the Hamiltonian paths in a constrained network. It had no bearing on tomorrow's schedule, no place in the rumor mill. But working through it steadied him. In math, a false statement could not survive the proof process. It would collapse under scrutiny, no matter how loud it was proclaimed. Rumors worked the same way eventually, but only if you kept showing the truth, one clear step at a time. Somewhere in the building, voices rose and fell, laughter from the common room, the clatter of a dropped pen. Jake kept working the pencil, moving in slow, sure lines, each one an act of resistance. By the time he set the pencil down, the graph was complete, the count exact, the proof neat. It was not for a score or a coach or a sponsor. It was for the orchard kid in worn boots who had come here to solve problems, and for the unshakable truth that in mathematics, the only image that mattered was the one drawn by a clean, unbroken proof. The morning announcement came like a cold wind through the camp. Rebecca stood at the front of the lecture hall, her voice steady but carrying a weight that made every pencil stop mid-note. Today, she said, we will hold the elimination test. You have 90 minutes. The lowest scoring students will not continue in the program. A ripple moved through the room. Some students leaned forward as if bracing for impact. Others exchanged glances that were half challenge, half fear. Jake sat still, hands resting on the closed cover of his notebook. Rebecca continued. The problem you receive will not be a standard competition. Problem. It will be difficult, but solvable. And for some of you, this will be your last day here. When the papers were handed out, Jake read the problem once, twice, 3 times. The page contained only a single task. given a positive integer, and determine in how many ways it can be written, as a sum of distinct positive integers, where the order of addends does not matter. It was a partition problem, but with a restriction on distinct parts. Most of the room bent over their papers, writing the first few cases 1, 2, 3, and trying to guess a formula, but Jake knew from long nights at the kitchen table that guessing was a trap here. He set down his pencil for a moment, closed his eyes, and pictured the orchard. Not the trees this time, but the storage barn in harvest season. Crates stacked high, each a different size. No crate repeated. The problem was not unlike finding all the possible arrangements of such stacks, where the sum of their heights was exactly, and he began building the answer step by step. First, he recalled that the generating function for partitions into distinct parts is the product over k of 1 plus x to the power k for k from 1 to infinity. The coefficient of x to the power n in this expansion would give the number of such partitions. That might be too heavy for some, but Jake had his own way of translating. He wrote small tables of partitions, starting from the smallest and checking the structure to ensure no repetition of parts. He saw patterns in the differences between counts for successive n and began constructing a recursive relation. P distinct n equals P distinct n minus 1 plus P distinct n minus k, where k was the smallest unused part. Minutes passed. The scratching of pencils grew faster, some students flipping pages as if looking for a hidden hint. One boy sighed loudly, erased a page of work, and began again. Sarah sat 2 rows ahead, her head bent, steady movements of her pen. Jake worked without rushing. Each time he found a new value, he checked it against the structure. Of smaller cases, like checking each gear in a machine before starting the motor, the numbers formed a sequence he recognized from an old book on integer partitions. He did not need to remember its name. He only needed to be sure it was right. At the 40-minute mark, he had not only the answer for the given n, but also a clean proof, explaining why the recursion covered all possibilities without overlap. The proof was short, barely half a page, but every step linked to the one before it, like a chain, with no weak link. In the last minutes, Rebecca called time. Papers were collected. The air in the room felt thick as students stood stretched and walked out in small groups. Some smiled in relief. Others stared straight ahead. In the courtyard, Travis stood with 2 other boys. His voice carried just enough for Jake to hear. "Some problems are meant to show who does not belong," he said without looking at him. Jake walked past without slowing. The results were to be announced in the main hall that afternoon. Jake spent the hours in between by the pond, notebook in his lap. The surface of the water was still broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish. He worked through a geometry problem about tangents to a circle from points on a parabola. The familiar pull of logic kept his thoughts from drifting too far toward what might happen next. When the students gathered in the hall, the air felt heavy. The coaching staff stood at the front, Rebecca in the center with a folded sheet of paper in her hand. "The following students will continue in the program," she said, and began reading names. Each name was a step closer to the end of the list, and still Jake had not heard his own. Sarah's name came. She glanced back at him briefly before turning forward again. Then Rebecca read Jake Miller, Delta County, Colorado. There was a pause in the hall. A few heads turned. Halverson stood near the wall, his expression fixed, unreadable. Jake stood quietly, letting the moment pass before sitting again. When all the names had been read, Rebecca set the paper aside. "Those not called today, we thank you for your work. Your journey in mathematics does not end here, but your time with this team does. Please take the evening to pack and speak with your instructors if you wish." The dismissed students left slowly, some with heads high, others not meeting anyone's eyes. The room felt emptier, yet more focused. Jake caught Sarah's small nod as they walked out together into the late afternoon light. You know she said they will not stop trying to push you out. Jake shrugged. In the orchard, storms come whether you expect them or not. You just brace the trees and wait them out. Sarah smiled. That is not a bad way to think about this camp. That night, Jake sat at his desk, the problem from the test still fresh in his mind. He rewrote his solution from memory, making it cleaner than before, adding small notes in the margin about possible extensions to restricted partitions. He did not know if anyone would read it, but he liked having it written the way a carpenter likes seeing a joint fit perfectly flush. Outside the window, the campus was quiet. Lights glowed in other dorms, scattered like points on a coordinate grid. Jake felt the calm of a proof, completed and correct. The next challenge would come soon enough, but tonight, the orchard kid in worn boots had passed another gate and done it with the work, not with the story. 2 days after the elimination test, the air in the camp felt sharper, as if the buildings themselves were listening. Jake noticed that some instructors spoke more quickly during lessons, glancing at the clock as if they had somewhere else to be. Whispers followed Rebecca when she walked across the courtyard. At breakfast, Sarah leaned toward him over her plate of toast and eggs. "Valcorp is pushing again," she said quietly. "Halverson has been talking to the board every day since the test." Jake kept his voice low. "And what does he want now?" She met his eyes. "For you to be replaced." This time, it is not just talk in the dorms. By midday, the call came. All coaching staff and Valcorp representatives would meet in the main conference room. Students were told to remain in their dorms, but word spread fast. Through the open windows of the study hall, Jake saw Rebecca walking toward the administration building. Her step measured her shoulders square. In the orchard, a walk like that meant someone had decided exactly how much they were willing to lose and how much they were willing to fight for. The meeting began in a long, narrow room with a polished oak table. At one end sat the camp director, flanked by 2 senior coaches. On the other side, Halverson leaned back in his chair, his silver tie pin catching the overhead light. A second Valcorp representative, a woman with an immaculate blazer, tapped notes into a tablet. "We have a problem," Halverson began. "One of our competitors does not meet the image we have worked years to build. Sponsors expect a certain standard, a visual consistency that communicates excellence and prestige." Rebecca's voice cut through the still air. "Excellence is in the mathematics, not in the shine of a shoe." Halverson gave a tight smile. "You are paid to train the team, not define the brand. Without Valcorp, there is no budget to send a team at all." The camp director shifted uncomfortably. "Let us keep the discussion factual. Jake Miller scored in the top 5 on the elimination test, and his solutions were exemplary." Halverson's tone sharpened. "He scored well, yes. But when international media takes photos in July, what will they see? A boy in torn work boots and a thrift store jacket. That is not the picture of American leadership in mathematics." Rebecca's reply came steady. "If your measure of leadership is leather polish instead of proof elegance, then you misunderstand this field entirely." The second Valcorp representative spoke. "We are not asking you to lower your mathematical standards. We are saying there are equally qualified candidates who present better for the world stage." Rebecca leaned forward. "Equally qualified is not the same as better. And you will not find many who can see the structure of a hard combinatorics problem the way that boy does." Halverson folded his arms. "If he stays, Valcorp will withdraw its sponsorship effective immediately." The words dropped into the room like a sudden frost in late spring. The director looked down at his notes. The other coaches exchanged glances. Rebecca did not blink. "Then I will withdraw too. And you can explain to the Mathematical Association why your funding demands dictated the team roster." Silence held for several seconds. Halverson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The director cleared his throat. "We will take a recess." Outside in the corridor, Rebecca stood alone for a moment before walking toward the courtyard. Jake, who had been waiting near the corner, stepped forward. "They want you out," she said plainly. "And they are willing to burn the camp down to do it." Jake asked quietly, "And what will you do?" Her gaze was steady. "Fight for you. Not because I pity you, but because you earned it." That evening, the campus buzzed with speculation. Some students avoided Jake entirely. Others came up with quiet words of support. Sarah found him in the library and sat across from him. "They cannot force you out without the board's approval," she said. "But ValeCorp is threatening the whole program." Jake opened his notebook. "I cannot control what they do, but I can make it impossible for anyone to say I do not belong here." He turned to a problem from an old Olympiad involving finding all integer solutions to a certain Diophantine equation. The method required transforming the equation into a product of factors and reasoning through possible divisors. As he worked, the noise of the library faded. Numbers did not care about sponsors or photo shoots. They cared about truth and proof. The next morning, Rebecca called a brief meeting of the students in the lecture hall. Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight. "You may hear things in the coming days. I want you to remember that your place here is earned by your work, nothing else. What happens outside the math problems is beyond your control. What happens on the page is yours alone." Jake listened without looking around. The truth of those words felt like the orchard's soil under his boots, solid even in wind. Late that night, a decision was made behind closed doors. Jake did not know the details, only that Rebecca returned from the administration building with her shoulders still square. She said nothing to him, but the brief nod she gave was enough. In the orchard, such a nod meant the frost had passed and the blossoms had survived. The work ahead would still be hard, but the season was alive. The day of the team announcement began with a heavy stillness. Clouds hung low over the campus, muting the early light so that even the grass looked subdued. Jake woke before the dorm bell rang and sat for a moment on the edge of his bed, boots resting on the floor, hands folded as if holding a thought that could break if moved too quickly. Down in the dining hall, students moved with the restless energy of horses before a race. Some laughed too loudly, others ate in silence, staring at nothing. Sarah joined Jake at his table, a plate of eggs untouched before her. "It is today," she said softly. "The list will be read in the auditorium after lunch." Jake nodded. His oatmeal tasted of nothing. He kept his voice level. "Are they still talking about it?" Sarah met his eyes. "ValeCorp is not here to watch this morning, but they will be at the announcement. The deputy president himself." Classes that morning were a blur. In the lecture on combinatorial geometry, Jake took notes, but the words seemed to pass through him like wind through an open barn. His pencil moved automatically, marking down the steps of a proof that a certain set of points in the plane must determine at least in distinct distances. The reasoning was clean and logical, but his mind was elsewhere, measuring time until the afternoon. When the lunch bell rang, the hum of conversation in the dining hall had an edge to it. No one wanted to be seen caring too much, but eyes flicked to the clock again and again. Jake ate little. At precisely 1 o'clock, the students filed into the auditorium. The stage was bare except for a lectern and 2 rows of chairs for the coaches. Rebecca sat in the center, her posture calm, her hands folded on her lap. To her left sat the camp director. On the far right was the ValeCorp deputy president, a man in a dark suit whose polished shoes caught the stage lights. The director stepped to the lectern. "We will now announce the members of this year's national mathematics team. These students will represent our country at the international competition this summer." A stillness fell over the hall. The only sound was the creak of a chair somewhere in the back. The director unfolded a sheet of paper and began reading names. One by one they came, and each time a name was called, the student stood and walked to the side of the stage. Some were met with scattered applause, others with bursts of cheering from friends. 5 names passed. Jake's had not been called. He sat very still, feeling the familiar weight of waiting just as he had waited in the orchard for the first signs of frost to pass. Then the director paused and looked down the list once more. Jake Miller, Delta County, Colorado. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then applause rose not loud but steady. Jake stood, walked to the stage, his boots sounding firm on the wooden steps. He felt the eyes on him, including those of the Vail Corp deputy president, whose expression did not change. When the last name was read, Rebecca stepped forward to speak. This team was chosen for one reason only. She said their ability to solve problems at the highest level under pressure. Every member here earned this place through work proof and persistence. That is the image we will take to the world stage. Her gaze swept the audience, resting briefly on the front row where the Vail Corp executives sat. After the announcement, students crowded around to congratulate the team. Sarah found Jake near the side door. "You were the first name from the second half," she said with a grin. "That was not an accident." Jake smiled faintly. "I will take it as a good sign." Rebecca joined them a few minutes later. Her tone was brisk, but there was a spark in her eyes. "You have work to do, Miller. The problems ahead will be harder than anything you have seen so far." Jake nodded. "That is how I like it." That evening, the newly named team met in a small classroom for their first closed session. Rebecca handed out a set of problems without comment. Jake scanned the first one, a geometry problem involving the intersection of 3 circles and the determination of an angle in terms of given distances. He began with a diagram, then introduced auxiliary lines, translating the geometry into a set of equations in trigonometric form. The solution emerged cleanly, and he wrote it in neat steps that could be read without explanation. When he looked up, Rebecca was watching from the back of the room. Outside night had settled over the campus. The lamps along the walkways glowed in soft halos, and the air smelled faintly of rain, though no drops had fallen yet. Jake walked slowly back to the dorm, his notebook under his arm. He thought of the day's events, the tension of the waiting the moment his name was called, the quiet strength in Rebecca's voice as she faced the sponsors. In the orchard, a season could be saved in a single night if the frost passed and the buds held firm. Today felt like that kind of night. The news broke before breakfast the next day. Someone had posted a photo of the new team on a mathematics forum. In the image, Jake stood at the far right of the group, his posture straight, his boots plain and scuffed against the polished shoes of the others. The caption beneath was simple but loaded: "Boy from Colorado Farm joins National Mathematics Team." By mid-morning, the story had been picked up by 2 small news sites. By noon, larger outlets had joined in. Some headlines spoke of inspiration and grit. Others framed it as a controversy. Sarah met Jake in the hallway outside the lecture room, holding her phone. "You are on the front page of 3 national feeds," she said. "And Vail Corp is not happy." Jake took the phone and scanned a headline. "Farm Kid in Boots wins spot on U.S. math team despite corporate objections." He handed it back. The work is the same no matter who reads about it. That afternoon, the campus press office called a brief meeting for the team. The public relations officer, a thin man with restless eyes, explained the situation. "Some outlets are celebrating your story, Jake. Others are quoting anonymous sources, questioning whether you really solved all your problems on your own." Jake looked at him evenly. "And what is the official response?" "We are preparing a statement about the selection process. Transparent and fair," he said quickly. "But be careful with interviews." In the days that followed, the attention grew. A regional television crew arrived to film a short segment on the team. They asked to interview Jake separately. The reporter, a woman with a calm voice, asked about his upbringing. "I grew up in Delta County," he said. "My father repairs farm machinery and runs a small apple orchard. Most of what I know in math started with a few old books and the problems in them." She asked about the boots. "They are the only pair I have that lasts through the seasons," he said simply. Not all the coverage was kind. An online article with no named author accused Jake of receiving special treatment for the sake of a dramatic story. It claimed that Vail Corp had initially opposed his selection, but that the coaches kept him for publicity. Rebecca called him into her office. "Sit," she said. Her desk was piled with problem sets. "I know you have seen the articles." Jake nodded. "You cannot fight rumors with anger," she continued. "You fight them with results. At the competition, your solutions will speak louder than any of this." Training intensified. The team worked long hours in the lecture rooms on problems that pushed every limit. Jake thrived in the quiet intensity. One day the set included a functional equation problem. Find all functions f from the positive integers to the positive integers such that f of m plus n plus f of m times n equals f of m times f of n, for all positive integers m and n. The problem unfolded slowly. Jake tested small values, then reasoned that constant functions failed quickly. By substituting m equals n equals 1, he found the first key restriction. Step by step, he narrowed the possibilities until the only function that satisfied all conditions was f of k equals k plus 1 for all positive integers k. When he presented the proof, Rebecca's only response was a satisfied nod. Outside the classroom, the media storm continued. Vail Corp released a statement implying that while they supported all team members, they reserved the right to review selection criteria in the future. The wording was careful, but the meaning was clear. Some students avoided Jake, fearing the attention. Others quietly offered support. Sarah remained steady at his side. "You know," she said one evening walking back from the library, "you are making them nervous because you keep solving everything they put in front of you." Jake smiled faintly. "Then I will keep doing that." One morning, a package arrived for him at the dorm office. Inside was a pair of brand-new leather shoes and a typed note that read, "Wear these for the competition. No signature." Jake set the shoes back in the box and returned it to the office with a short reply, "Not needed, thank you." Toward the end of the week, Rebecca gathered the team. "You will face the strongest young mathematicians in the world," she told them. "You will also carry the weight of representing more than yourselves. Focus on the problems. Everything else is noise." Jake listened and thought of the orchard again. Storms passed and blossoms opened when the roots held firm. The proof of a season was in the harvest, not in the noise of the wind. By the weekend, the reporters had mostly left. The team settled back into its rhythm. But Jake knew the quiet was temporary. In the competition hall abroad, every move would be watched and every solution examined. That was fine. In mathematics, the scrutiny was the point. For now, the orchard kid in worn boots kept working each line of his proofs an anchor against the swirl of headlines outside. The flight to the competition city took 9 hours and passed through 2 time zones. Jake spent most of it with a notebook open on the tray table, reviewing old problems. The hum of the engines was steady and low, a sound that reminded him of the grain dryer back home in the orchard. Around him, the rest of the team drifted between sleep and quiet conversation. Sarah sat across the aisle reading through a folder of geometry notes. When the plane landed, the team was met by volunteers in bright jackets carrying signs for each country. Outside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of summer. Banners hung across the streets with the competition logo. Everywhere Jake looked, there were students his age speaking different languages, carrying the same thick problem booklets under their arms. The first day was for orientation and practice. The competition hall was a vast room with long rows of tables under highlights. Each seat had a number and a small flag. Jake found his place near the middle of the hall. The desk was bare except for paper pencils and a bottle of water. Rebecca walked past each row, her expression calm. Remember, she told the team the first day is for the first 3 problems, 6 hours total. Pace yourselves and trust your preparation. When the first official contest day arrived, Jake felt the same quiet focus he knew from repairing an engine. The problems lay before him, printed in clear black type. The first was an algebraic inequality, manageable with careful application of the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality and some bounding arguments. He worked through it steadily, checking each step for gaps. The second problem was combinatorics counting sequences under certain restrictions. Jake approached it like arranging crates in the barn, so no 2 stacks had the same height. A recurrence emerged, and the answer followed. The third was geometry, a problem involving circles tangent to the sides of a triangle and certain angle relationships. He drew a precise diagram and used the law of sines to connect the given lengths. When time was called, Jake set down his pencil with the calm certainty of a day's work done. That evening, the team gathered in the hotel conference room to discuss solutions. They could not share answers yet, but they talked about strategies. Sarah leaned toward Jake. "You finished all 3?" She shook her head, smiling. "You make it look easy." Jake shook his head. Nothing is easy until it is proven. The second contest day brought the final 3 problems. These were meant to stretch even the strongest competitors. The first 2 were difficult, but yielded after steady work a number theory proof and a graph theory construction. The final problem was different. It was a geometry question disguised as a physics one, describing a sloped plot of land with points where water could be collected and channels dug to direct flow. The goal was to determine the minimal length of channels to reach all collection points. Jake read it twice. The orchard came to mind the way spring meltwater flowed down the slopes between the rows of apple trees. He began modeling the land as a weighted graph where vertices were the collection points and edges the possible channels. The problem became finding the minimal spanning tree. Using Prim's algorithm in his head, he traced the network until the optimal connections were clear. With 20 minutes left, he wrote the final proof and double-checked the calculation. When the competition ended, the results would not be released until the closing ceremony. In the meantime, teams exchanged pins and small gifts. Jake received pins from 4 countries and gave away apple-shaped pins Rebecca had brought from Colorado. Some international coaches came to speak with him, curious about his background. One older coach from Eastern Europe shook his hand firmly and said, "A mind like yours needs only paper and pencil. The rest is noise." On the morning of the closing ceremony, the hall filled with teams in matching jackets. The flags of each country lined the stage. The head of the jury stepped to the microphone and began reading the results, starting with honorable mentions, then bronze medals. When the silver medal names were called, Jake listened without expectation. Then he heard his own name and country. The applause from his teammates was immediate. He walked to the stage and accepted the medal, the weight of it cool in his hand. After the ceremony, reporters gathered at the edge of the hall. One asked Jake what the medal meant to him. "It means the work spoke for itself," he said. "That is all I wanted." Later, Rebecca caught up to him in the corridor. "You know," she said, "Vale Corp will have to live with this result. They cannot argue against the scoreboard." Jake nodded. "In the orchard, you do not argue with the harvest. You just count it." That night, the team celebrated quietly in the hotel lounge. Outside, the city lights reflected on the river. Jake sat with Sarah and looked out at the water, thinking of the long path from the orchard to this stage. The noise had followed him across miles and borders, but so had the work. And in the end, it was the work that lasted. The flight home was quieter than the one that had carried the team to the competition. The medals were packed away in small velvet cases, the excitement of the stage replaced by a calm satisfaction. Jake sat by the window watching clouds drift past like slow-moving hills. Sarah dozed beside him, her medal in her pocket. When the plane landed in the United States, the team was met by a few reporters and family members at the terminal. Rebecca shook Jake's hand firmly before they parted. "You kept your focus," she said. "Remember that the work you did here is only the beginning." Back in Delta County, the orchard was in full summer leaf. Rows of apple trees stood under the bright sun, their branches heavy with early fruit. Jake's father met him at the gate of the property and gripped his shoulder in the wordless way of someone who trusted action more than talk. At dinner, his mother listened as he told the story of the problems and the long hours in the competition hall. She smiled at the part about the water channels problem. "Sounds like you were thinking of home even over there," she said. The next week, an envelope arrived from the National Mathematics Organization. Inside was an offer of a full scholarship to study mathematics at a university of his choice. Jake read it at the kitchen table with the same steady expression he wore while solving a problem. He accepted the offer, but told his parents he wanted to wait a year before starting. "There is work to do here first," he said. That work began quietly. Jake cleared out an unused shed at the edge of the orchard and set up a few long tables. He found chalkboards and second-hand chairs from the local school district. Word spread quickly that he was offering free math lessons to local kids after the farm day ended. The first evening, 6 children came, some still in their dusty work clothes from the fields. Jake started with simple problems, but explained them with the same care he had given the competition proofs. He showed them how to think about numbers as patterns and shapes, not just marks on paper. By the end of the summer, the class had grown to 20. Parents brought pies and jars of jam as thanks. The shed filled with the sound of pencils and the quiet hum of concentration. One evening, as the sun set behind the orchard, Jake stayed after the lesson talking with a boy of 12 who had stayed to work on a geometry problem. The boy looked up and asked, "Do you think someone from here could really go as far as you did?" Jake smiled. "I know they can. And if you want it, we will work until you are ready." In the fall, a letter came from Rebecca. It was brief, but carried weight. Jake, I thought you should know Vale Corp is no longer our main sponsor. After the competition, the government approved direct funding for the national team. Some battles take more than proofs to win, but your medal helped win this one. He read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it inside his notebook. In mathematics, results are recorded and remembered. Now he knew the same could be true beyond the page. Months passed. The orchard shifted from green to gold and then to the bare lines of winter. Jake's class continued through it all, the shed warmed by a small stove. The children worked on problems that built from arithmetic to algebra to the beginnings of combinatorics. Jake showed them how to break a problem into parts the way an engine was broken down for repair. Sometimes on quiet nights he would take out his medal not to polish it, but to remind himself of the path it represented. From the first old book of problems to the long bus ride to the camp to the stage on the other side of the world, every step had been built on persistence. One snowy evening, Sarah visited on her way to a conference in the city. They walked through the orchard, the snow soft underfoot. "You could be anywhere," she said. "Why here?" "Because the orchard is where I learned how to think," Jake replied. "And because someone has to show these kids that the gates are not locked." Spring returned with the scent of blossoms. On the first day, the apple trees were in bloom. Jake arrived early to the shed. He wrote a single sentence on the board before the students came in. Mathematics belongs to anyone willing to work for it. When the children arrived, he pointed to the sentence. "This is the only image you need to fit," he said. "The image of someone who keeps working until the proof is complete." That evening, after the students had gone, Jake sat alone on the step of the shed. The orchard stretched before him, rows of trees glowing in the last light. He thought of the voices that had once said he did not belong, of the rumors and the meetings behind closed doors. They had been loud for a while, but like storms they had passed. The work had remained. And so had the boots, which now rested by the door, the same ones he had worn on the first day at camp. In the end, he thought it was never about fitting anyone's image. It was about building something true and letting it stand in the light. Thank you for staying with Jake's journey. From the apple rows of Delta County, from a pair of worn boots to a silver medal on the international stage, and then back home to plant the seeds of knowledge for the next generation. If this story touched a memory or sparked a bit of belief in you, then the journey has been complete. Because some victories are not loud, not bright, but warm enough to light a lifetime. May you always keep your own orchard, a place where good things are tended and left for those who come after. Thank you for sharing this time, and I hope we meet again in the next story.